Hey, folks, welcome back to another edition. Trying something yet again a little bit different. Hopefully, this works okay. Uh, Coming to you with some Postgres questions. So, hopefully, if you're here with Postgres content, I actually have some, and we'll do that, and hopefully, it'll all work out. Um, Thanks for hanging in there. I realize I have this stuff. The AV club side of me isn't quite as strong, I guess, as the Postgres side. So, which is probably a good thing on some level. In any case, so back with another edition. I got a lot going on this week, but I did want to try to get one of these in. I feel like I've been not so much procrastinating, just conflicting things coming up here and there. So here we are. We'll go in. We'll jump and do some questions. I pulled just a weird variety in the backlog the last couple weeks. So pulled some of those up. Hopefully those will be useful for folks. If you have been getting something out of us, please do like and subscribe. And if you know someone who either has Postgres questions or wants to hear about Postgres answers, of course, please consider sharing with them. Always happy to have more people involved. If you have to give them a fair warning, like, hey, he's messing around with all kinds of stuff, channel wise, camera wise, audio wise, like that's cool. But hopefully the content is otherwise useful. So we'll see how it goes. Wearing the Orioles shirt here today. Going to be heading over to St. Pete this evening to watch Rays Orioles game. And it's always conflicting when I watch those two teams play each other. But should be a good time. Also, some other stuff going on this week. Did want to mention Posette, if I remember the name correct. I hope that's how they're pronouncing that. I guess I'll find out for sure tomorrow, which is the conference that Microsoft puts on. It's a virtual conference for Postgres, was previously known as CitusCon. That is, well, I guess I'm going to say it's Tuesday and Wednesday, tomorrow and Wednesday, at least for me, because that's the US-based streams. I think there are 4 streams. 2 are US hours, US-friendly hours, and then I guess the other 2 are maybe European friendly hours, but I think also maybe like trying to think of like Australia, sort of Eurasia. Well, it's not Eurasia because it's like the other part of it. New Zealand, like China, like sort of those, like that sort of time zone over there. Oceania, I guess we refer to that as Oceania friendly hours. I have to look. I just remember that those other streams were not friendly for my time, so I don't think I'll be on during those. But I do plan to watch at least some of the talks. I'm hoping to watch them, depending on how my schedule works out the next couple of days. If you're around and watching that live, I will most likely be in the Microsoft open source community Discord, which I believe is the official back channel for the conference. So that's where you'll find me. I mean, I'll have Slack open, but I don't plan to be chatting there like super active. So if you find me there and you are watching the stream, I'll probably be like, yeah, suck it up, get on the Discord. Like, it's cool. Even though it may not be as cool on Discord as Slack, whatever. I know everyone's got their allegiances. You can do this on IRC, dang it. So in any case, look for me there. I'll be happy again to chat with anybody while that's going on, presuming I'm around. And I think that kicks off 11 a.m. Eastern time, which would be like 8 a.m. Pacific time. And I guess that's probably something like 4 p.m. Feel like I'm off by at least an hour there, UTC. It's probably more like 3 p.m. Yeah, binary decimal-based math is hard. It's probably more like 3 p.m. or maybe even 2 p.m. So if you're in some other time zone other than Eastern, I'm not even so sure that I'm sure about Eastern, but I'm pretty sure it's at 11 a.m. It kicks off tomorrow. And in any other time zone, you might want to look that up. And actually, I will mention they have a very cool little time zone adjuster thing on the website. So if you search for, I guess probably just Posette, because it's such a, I don't want to say it's such an odd word, but it's an uncommon word. Possette, I think, or Posette Postgres Conference. That should definitely get you there. And then you can look up the different track times or whatever. But I just remember, like, I went on to look to figure out like when the thing was kicking off and all that a couple weeks ago, and they had a really nice drop down of like pick your time zone that you want to know, and then it readjusts the schedule for your time zone. So should actually be pretty easy to figure out if you go do that. So hopefully I'll see you there tomorrow or Wednesday. But until then, why don't we go ahead and jump into the Postgres questions for here, and we'll get those taken care of. So first question is, what is the Postgres version of Oracle's trunc command? And for those that don't know, trunc is a function inside Oracle that it's not like truncate, like the Postgres truncate command. It's actually meant to truncate values. And the way that I used it, and I'm trying to recall, I feel like there might have been like some arithmetic oriented way to use trunc as well. But the way that I recall using it a lot was there would be things like trunc sysdate or trunc sysdate -1 or something like that to get a date value from a timestamp. And that was like the really common usage. And I'm pretty sure that is the primary way that that thing is used, because the Postgres equivalent essentially is a function called date trunc, which is date underscore trunc TRUNC. And then you would pass in like now, so date trunc now would give you the current date. And so that's the essential equivalent. Now, I would say, I don't know this, if you are in a big Oracle to Postgres migration, you could look at possibly EDB or FCE, which is an open source Postgres extension that re-implements a bunch of Oracle functionality in community Postgres. I don't know if they have a trunc equivalent. I feel like they probably do, which would be just essentially a re-implementation of the trunc function, probably to just call date trunc. I don't know. Maybe it'd be something more than that. If there is other use cases for trunc, and by all means drop them in the comments and I'll happily figure out how to address them. It escapes me now because I just remember doing dates all the time. And date trunc leads me to believe that's the main way that was used. So that you could look at that. Although I would actually, and I talked about this before with I think there was a question that I answered here sometime back on like, what is the Postgres equivalent of sysdate? And sort of the same thing sort of applies here with trunc, that in this case, like you have SQL that doesn't really work on both systems, whether you're going to use trunc or date trunc, right? You've got to change the SQL anyway. So what I encourage people to do is actually go change the SQL that you're using, right, that you're calling in your application. Instead of using trunc, just switch it to like current date, because current date will work in both systems. And then that's sort of like one less moving part that you have to worry about if you go ahead of time and change your SQL to be sort of SQL standard SQL, right, rather than using the sort of vendor specific version. So I would definitely encourage you to do that instead. If you're going to change the SQL anyways, and you kind of are going to have to do that and run it with the same SQL in both systems, you should get the same semantics there. If there's some other way that you're using it, again, like by all means, let me know, and I'm happy to try to help with that. But that would be sort of my take on how to approach that problem. But otherwise, the first step, I guess, go read in the docs on date trunc, and that will probably point you in the right place. So, all right, question number 2. And this question actually, I feel like makes no sense because the answer is in the question. How do you utilize a read replica in AWS to make updates in database tables? And I just sort of feel like, so you called it a read replica, and it's called that for a reason. It's because you're supposed to use the replica for reads and not actually to make updates in your tables. So, okay. But I want to be helpful. So other than pointing out sort of your question makes no sense, but let me try to make it make sense. So I have done a few of these crazy ideas in the past. And so let me throw some crazy ideas at you, and maybe these are what you're trying to do, and maybe this would be helpful. So one example of where I have used a read replica to help me make an update, maybe this is what you mean, is in the case of doing something like a backfill, where I need to add values into a table that are based on other values, within the table. So the most common one, and I kind of did a talk on this, the int to big int conversion talk, where I basically need to look at other values, other columns to populate a column, right? And I'm backfilling. If you want to do that and not actually, sort of stress your buffers by needing to read every row in the table from the primary, right, including like all those rows that you would otherwise never access, and they're sitting on spinning Rust rather than a memory, you can actually, at least in theory, read that from a read replica, right? So you have, usually in this scenario, you would not do this directly in a primary. You could do it though, but you might have like a utility script that's sort of sitting external to your databases, and it would just go look on the read replica and pull up the data over there, and then go update the one in the primary. And yeah, you got to worry about race conditions and all that good stuff. That's why consultants get paid the big bucks, to figure that stuff out and make sure it works correctly. But or maybe high-priced engineers figure that stuff out, whatever. But main thing is, so if there's a case where you need to first read data and then update it and write it back, like you could move those reads off to another system, thereby preserving your buffers for your sort of active workload. So that would be one way that technically you have utilized a read replica to help you make updates on a database table. Outside of that, like I think you start diving into distributed systems territory, and there's a few different ways that could apply. Maybe you're thinking AWS has some tooling around logical replication. So you're thinking like, well, if I set up a logical replica, can I then update tables on the logical replica? And you probably can, but those don't cascade back to the primary unless you're doing some kind of weird multi-directional replication logically, which is really not what RDS does, or Aurora, or like any of that tooling. So that's not the right answer. If that's the answer you came up with, probably not the right answer. I've actually, okay, so I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole. You could also look at something like Citus. Now, again, it depends. Like, so if you're sharding, now you're not really using read replicas because now you've got individual shards. You may be able to read and write those. Again, I would say this is not a scenario where if you need those updates to propagate back to the central central database in the system, then this doesn't really work. But if you had a sharded table, it was across multiple nodes, you could actually connect to those individual nodes and do writes over there. So that might help you because you're essentially spreading the write workload off to these individual shards rather than having to do it on a central machine. But I feel like we're solving a different problem. And it would be the same thing if I said, like, well, maybe you use something like PG Edge. But again, now we're definitely outside the bounds of what RDS actually supports. But PG Edge is like a distributed Postgres system where you can do writes on multiple nodes, and it has some conflict resolution magic under the hood in order to help you propagate those writes off to multiple nodes. So think of it like a Postgres type thing that looks like React or something like that, like operates in a similar manner if you're into that. So, but again, like we're talking like distributed systems. We're not talking read replicas or any of that stuff. Like just completely kind of off the rails from where the original question was. So I think the answer to the original question is, you remember when you called it read replicas, like it's for reading, not for writing, and don't do that. I think that actually is the correct answer, but there's some other things to chew on there. If that doesn't help, I guess ask me a better question, and maybe you'll get a better answer. Aha. All right. Question number 3, and this one's so simple. I'll try to make it complicated. How do I run a .sql file in Postgres? Very simple. Now, I'm going to caveat and say that there's no official thing of what a .sql file is. Typically, what that is just a straight like ASCII text file. It just has SQL commands written in there, right? And so inserts, updates, whatever it might be. Select statements could be whatever. And so it's just text, and so that it can be done like any other text file, and actually anything that can read in the text that could then like send it over to the database could actually interact with that. But I'll give you sort of the 3 common ones if you're working on the command line. And often we see files that are generated, they're .SQL files, so they just have, like I said, SQL queries in them. If you're using PSQL, I think the first way most people do this probably isn't actually true, but I would say is the -f flag to PSQL, which is to point to a file. So PSQL -f, mydb.sql, and then it will read that file and go run it in your database, wherever it's connecting to. The other way, which I sort of wonder, and this is just like I guess it depends. I don't know how comfortable people are with different shells or whatever, but like certainly the way that I tend to do this is like I would cat the file and pipe it into PSQL, and you can do it that way. Or like, so I've done this where like if I have a bunch of sort of SQL queries, like I've grepped out certain queries and pipe that over into PSQL. from a .sql file. So I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff you can do like that. It's a text file, right? So anything, if you're hot on bash in the command line or whatever, ZSH and whatnot, you can do that, and that's all well and good. So that's sort of the other way. And I guess the third way that I'll mention, because I do this a lot, like when I'm updating Pagila, and I think that there might be an example of this in the Pagila documentation. Pagila is the sort of unofficial Postgres sample database, which like I've been, sort of looking at trying to decide, like, do I need to make changes for Postgres 17 or how good to go our way or whatever. But when I'm doing that, like, I'm usually connected to a database in PSQL, and then I use \i and then the file name, and that will import the file essentially and run all the SQL commands in Postgres. So that's sort of a third way that you can do it if you're working with text files on the command line. And again, like anything, like if you're using like Ruby or something, like if it can read the file, right, it can take that information and then send it over to the server, just like any other text files. It's just that there's no spec on what a .sql file is. So, and everybody, like if you do MySQL dump, will generate a .sql file because you can name it anything. That might not actually work if you run it in your Postgres system. So if you get a bunch of errors, it might be because your .sql file is full of some proprietary databases language, so proprietary language from a database. I should say it that way. Because Postgres would have the same thing, right? Like if you do a PG dump, it usually just goes to standard out, which then people pipe into .sql files. I do like to use different extensions for that kind of a thing. Although with a straight PG dump, I probably will just call it a .sql file. I've seen some people call it a .pgsql file so that it came from Postgres, because there's going to be things in there like set commands and whatnot, if it came from PG dump, that won't work in other databases. So it's not, I mean, it's essentially SQL, but it's technically not just SQL. And that's true of a lot of database systems. So, all right, hopefully that is useful. Like I said, I tried to complicate that answer as much as I could. So, all right. Fourth question is, are there any downsides to using JSON fields in Postgres? And I'm going to sort of cut this into two different ways that this question could be talking about. So the first way is sort of like, I'm going to say that, like, as a storage mechanism, should I use JSON? And the two sort of alternatives to that, to me, would be either text going one direction or JSON-B going in the other. And if you're storing actual JSON, what I would say is you really should be using JSON-B, which is sort of the binary storage format that Postgres has. It's specific to Postgres, so it's not like a standard thing necessarily, but it will be sort of more compact, like it's a little bit of compression in there and whatnot, versus just a plain JSON data type, or if you store that JSON as text. I would say using JSON over the text type is actually better. You'll get a little bit more in the way of sort of validating that you have actual JSON versus text is just going to take it as it comes and not actually worry about it. So I think there's a little bit to be gained with using JSON, but realistically, I probably would actually just say you should just use JSON-B and do it that way. So now, it could be that you're asking me a philosophical question, right? Which is sort of like, should I even store JSON in a Postgres database, right? Should I use a JSON field for my JSON data, or should I go back and be like, no, you've got to break that thing up and totally, turn it into relational data and store it in individual columns and all that. And I think that can be useful, but probably not so much. I think these types, whether it's like JSON or XML or whatnot, I think they have their use cases, which is, shouldn't be a controversial thing to say. I know like one system in particular that I worked on where we were doing sort of monitoring for other groups within the company, and they could write their own custom agents and have those report back data. And so we had a little spec of like, here's the information we need about, like, so we can understand like what this agent is and where its information belongs and whatnot. But we actually didn't care about the data that the agent sent back by and large, right? Like we wanted to know, like what was the version of the agent. So it was like in the spec, and like, we would figure out what is the timestamp that you think that you have on your machine that you're sending to us, so we could do some comparisons and stuff like that. But we also had basically like a large text blob field, so that if people want to do it, I think most of the agents were written to bring back XML data. I think it kind of predated JSON's popularity. But JSON certainly could be in there. And then I think other ones, it was just like sort of weird ad hoc text that they mashed together. But in that case, what we always said is like, we can collect that data for you. We are not going to query that. So if you want to do something like, I don't know, if you want any kind of validity checks as to whether it's the right data, or you want us to be able to run a report on who is actually reporting information of the agents that are deployed out in the field. We're not going to do that if it's on, the magic JSON field or whatever, that's just this big blob of text data. We don't do that. We can give that data to you. So if you want to pull that, we can give you like data dumps of that, and then you can go do analysis or whatever offline in your system. And that actually worked really well. Now I say like, we're not ever going to query that text below data. Obviously we end up doing that usually on ad hoc stuff where they're like, we need to see, like, we've added a field into the agent and we've updated our agents. So now we need to see if those agents are actually reporting in those updated fields, right? So then we could go and do queries. Typically, I think this is text blobs. We probably were doing like queries just to see like, okay, are we getting any fields back from the new ones that have been added? And then we could get reports on which agents out there were reporting that new stuff. But anyways, like, so like we would do a little bit of it, but by and large, like, we're going to make like web reports and that kind of stuff, but we would collect that data. And if you have data where you're like, it has to be, it's basically arbitrary and ad hoc, but I still need to collect it and then I'll give it back to people. By all means, like, store it in JSON, or though I would say store it in JSON-B, and don't worry about it as, like, should I make it all relational? And just, if you're going to actually query heavily or do specific reporting on fields that should always be coming back, then I would say it's not a bad idea to either break those out or just duplicate those, store those as the actual type that the type is. It'll make querying it so much better and so much faster, and you can actually do something with it that's interesting. So that's the two sides of, are there downsides? And there's always, life is a series of trade-offs, man. I say it all the time. So just be aware of that. Okay, and then the last question, I feel so bad. So someone by the name of Mahmoud Bajara had sent this in, and I felt very bad for this person. And so the last question was, how can I change the currency for my table column price in my Postgres database? And you're just like, so some of you out there are just like, oh my God, no, like, I hope this isn't what I think it is, but I think it's gotta be, right? So if you have a table, the column is price, and you want to change the currency, I suspect you're using the money type, and I hope you're not, but I mean, that seems to be the only way this would really make sense. If you're using the money type, and I definitely would say go read the docs on this. Actually, so the thing you should go read, there's a page in the Postgres wiki called Wiki Don't, and it has a little section on like, don't use the money type, with a little bit of information on like why it's such a bad idea. But by and large, the problem is that you can store money, right, in a column in Postgres, but it doesn't actually understand what currency means. So it will tell you it's in a given currency. Like, it'll tell you it's US dollars or euros or lira or whatever, reals, like, it's all good. But it doesn't know what that means. It's like the Chat GPT of data types for Postgres, right? Like, it's just making it all up essentially. So if you store, and the value, it's all in like the various like collation variables in your system, right? Like, so when you're running NTB and it's like, oh, LC collate is going to be like ENUS.UTF-8 or whatever it is. And I hate all this stuff. So it's like, I know, very loosey-goosey on what are the right things. Because I just, like, it's such a mess to have to go deal with it. But if you were like ENUS, like, then I think the one is LC monetary is the one that actually controls the money data type and what it displays back. So it would be USD, right, if you were ENUS. And so the problem is, like, if you are storing values in there, like 10, 15, 20, whatever, and your LC monetary is USD, so you think you have $10, $15, $20, but if you go change your LC monetary to like euros, right? So I think it's EUR. I'm not sure if there's a thing in the Postgres docs that like lists out all the different options, but in any case, if you put like euros in there, like, then suddenly it just changes it to 10 euros, 15 euros, 20 euros. And for all you high frequency currency traders, like, that if you switch from like $10 US is not equivalent to $10 euro. But again, Postgres has no concept of what actual different currencies mean with regards to money. So there's a few different ways people try to skin this cat. I mean, I think the easiest way to me is just have everybody agree on a given currency in the system. Don't actually don't use the money type, just store it as either like an integer or numeric. And everyone's going to agree that it's like US dollars or euros or whatever you want it to be. And then if somebody actually sells something in some other currency, like we're going to convert that to dollars before we store it. And then we'll just agree that it's all dollars and we don't actually store that piece of information anywhere. The other way usually is people put a integer, numeric, or whatever, right? So it'd be like the price, and then a second column, which means currency, where they'll store what the currency was for that. So you have to use those both as an application developer to understand, like use both of those to figure out what the right values are and how to mishmash those around. And the problem is, like, I've seen other people, like people have tried to do, like, can we create like a domain or a custom type that stores both halves of the information, right? So they'll have like 10 and USD put in together. But the problem you get is, like, anytime you want to try to do arithmetic on it, what does it mean if you take 10 US dollars times 10 euros, right? Like, what is the answer to that? Because it's not 100 of either of those two. So doing math becomes really complicated because you need to understand what the conversion is and where are you getting that information? Where does that data go? So, and then if you get into trying to implement, custom operators to do that stuff on custom data types, like it's a mess, and applications don't understand how that stuff goes together, right? Like if you're using, Rails and you've got an ORM, like it doesn't understand like that you need custom math operators for your custom data type, and it shouldn't understand that. I mean, it'd be nice when it does understand those things. It is nice when it does, like if you're using PostgreSQL or whatever. But if you're using some wackadoo thing like this custom money type you've invented, then not so much. So yeah. So like I said, the right answer here, Mahmoud, the right answer for you might be to start putting your resume out and find a place where they only do this kind of crazy stuff. But hopefully not. Hopefully that's not where you're at. But yeah, you don't want to use the money type. I think the 2-column approach is probably the best one. So that's what I would kind of recommend. Otherwise, like, I mean, you can look at the docs. Again, I think if you Google LC_monetary, I think is the one. That should get you to either like the doc page or hopefully the wiki page. I will drop a comment with the link to the wiki page. This is that important that people don't do this. In there, and it's actually like it's a pretty common one for it. It's amazing. It's a common one that you see a talk where somebody is like things not to do in Postgres, like money type usually is in that list, but we still find people run across it and trip over it because it's in Postgres. It's still there. I think the issue is that I think that money type is part of the SQL standard. So, and then implementation details as to how to actually put it together, I think is pretty loosey-goosey. So it's very vendor specific across databases, but I think it's supposed to actually have one, even though it's such a bad idea. So, all right. So that is the last question. Hopefully we've saved somebody's life today and got them to not use the money type before they had to. So we'll wrap it up there. I've got to get on the road and get out to St. Pete. Hopefully this video will actually work and you'll get to watch it and everyone will be happy. Otherwise, I will see you hopefully tomorrow in the Discord for Posette or somewhere on the road this fall. I do think I'm going to be at 1 or 2 conferences before the year is out. Once I get it locked down, I will definitely let everybody here know for sure. Other than that, as always, take care of yourselves. And if you can, take care of your database as well. And I'll see you in the next one.